Hey guys, I want to talk today about what I think is the biggest question that there possibly is, which is the question of why. Why is the source consciousness doing any of this? I was talking with a friend the other day, and we like to talk about these sorts of things, and we were discussing this topic, and it's a very very tricky. It's a very difficult topic. Ultimately, I think there's always going to be some sense of mystery, and you're never really going to know with much certainty, exactly what's going on. But I do think that over time you can build a perspective through your own experiences, through studying, through seeing what other people have discovered, and you can start to form some set of perspectives that will elucidate this problem. So when you think about the source consciousness as an infinite consciousness, it must be perfect, right? It must already know everything. So why would it go out from itself, and send portions of itself out just to turn around and come back? It's like saying, I'm going to go on a vacation, and I'm just going to go somewhere just for the purpose of being able to turn around and come home. Well, just stay home. You're already there. And if the source consciousness is already infinite, what is it doing? What is it doing with us? Why does it need us? So I think if you look first, it helps to start at the bottom to a certain degree. Just observe the world around you and what you are and what you seem to be going through. And you can start to form an understanding of at least what the physical world is for. And it's pretty clear after you think about it enough that, the physical world is a type of training ground. It's a type of school. It's a type of learning process where if you pay attention correctly, you can grow spiritually. You can increase your state of consciousness. You can increase, the amount of compassion and unconditional love that you're able to express. Slowly through fits and starts, you can start to do it, and you can start to make those improvements in yourself and in your life. And you can see that this physical world with all of its limitations is a really fantastic training ground for that. Because you are a limited being when you're here, which means that you cannot avoid the lessons that are coming to you. And so you can give yourself lessons, whether you know it or not. And you can't run away from the lessons. You can't hide from them. You may not learn the lesson, but the lesson will be there, and the lesson will repeat. And it will repeat as many times as it needs to until you learn it, and then you can move on to the next one. And if you were a much more, let's say, powerful entity in this life, or if you already had a higher state of consciousness, well, first of all, you might not need the lesson. But it could also be possible that the lesson is still good for you, but you may not want to learn it, because it's not going to be pretty and it's going to be a little bit rough, and you may not really want to go through with it. So part of what you're doing when you come into the physical world is that before you incarnate, you plan for yourself. At least as you start to develop as a soul, let's say, you start to take control over your process of evolution, of spiritual growth, of evolution, and so you start to plan your incarnations for yourself, and you can start to at least attempt to plan out certain things that will happen in your life that are going to give you the challenges that you need to grow. Now, there's other problems with this planet, which is there's billions of other people also doing the same thing, and we're not coordinating, so things can, it's not perfect, and things can go wrong, and everyone has free will, so maybe someone else's plan interferes with your plan, and then you just have to, you just have to roll with the punches and deal with it. But broadly speaking, that's sort of what you're doing. And many people, maybe they're not quite at that stage where they've taken some level of conscious control over their development and they're incarnating randomly, but that's okay because it's still a really important experience. You can still get a really good and interesting catalyst from a random incarnation, especially if you're, relatively young, let's say like a young soul, and you're just starting out, you're still going to learn a whole lot. But, at some point, maybe you've learned the early lessons enough so that you can start to plan things out. So, broadly speaking, that's kind of what, beings like us who are really fundamentally a type of energy, a type of consciousness, an encapsulation of consciousness. That's why we enter the physical world, because it's a training ground. And in the physical world, you train yourself to use your creativity, hopefully in good ways. And so you're learning responsibility, because you are a piece of the creator. So you are also a co-creator, and you have the power to create. But you need to learn to use that power wisely and responsibly. And so coming into this reality where you can see that your actions really can affect other people and they may not be able to hide from it, you learn to, modulate yourself and control yourself. Hopefully, maybe it takes a long time, and it certainly has for me. But that's sort of the goal. So you can see that you can affect other people. They can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. So let's all just learn to get along. That's one of the benefits of a physical planet like this, like the one that we're on, especially at the stage of development that we're all in. But I think it's important to come to understand that spiritual growth, that's not the goal just for the sake of having a goal. It's not, you're not here for the sake of spiritual growth, because spiritual growth is in and of itself something inherently good. I think that naturally develops as you come to a greater understanding, and you're going to desire spiritual growth. You're going to desire higher states of consciousness because it's going to open up new possibilities to you. But you don't have to. There are no mistakes, and there is no judgment. So it's not like you've been placed here in some arbitrary game or rule, set of rules that you have to kind of discover, and then let's see if you can pass the test. And if you do, you get a good grade. And if you don't, then you fail. And there's someone outside of you, some group or some being, some entity judging you. That doesn't happen. There's no judgment. And there are no mistakes. It's just you learning or not learning, depending on what you want. You can take all the time in the world if you want. You can have a million incarnations and just hang out, doing whatever you want. You don't have to incarnate. You can just stay. You can stay wherever it is that you come from. Let's say that you are, a consciousness that originates in the spirit realm. You don't have to incarnate. You can just stay there. So then what do? Well, that's the conundrum. After a while, you're going to see that you're limiting your own growth and you want to grow more. So it's a natural process, and I imagine it happens to every being. Everyone essentially has the same nature, that as a piece of the source consciousness, you have this natural desire that will come out sooner or later for experience and for comparison, even if you might hide and avoid it for a very long time. Eventually that's going to come out. So you decide for yourself how much time you want to take. You can spend a lot of time, hanging out, floating amongst the clouds. Go for it. Doesn't matter. Or you can, if you have a lust for life, you can just incarnate very rapidly over and over and over and over because you want to grow. You want to learn. You can do that too. And apparently some people do that, and then some people don't. Some people take a more leisurely route through the infinite possibilities. But ultimately, the physical planet, this existence is for the purpose of increasing your vibrational level. You can think of your consciousness. It's a bit of a metaphor that that it vibrates, but it's roughly it's roughly correct. And that's your state of consciousness. That's your ability to express unconditional love. In other words, to understand the ultimate unity of all things, and you can increase that while you're here and while you're incarnate. And where does this consciousness come from? Of course, everything ultimately comes from source consciousness, but you have to keep in mind that there's many, many dimensions, and there's many universes, and there's all sorts of weird stuff out there. So there are beings, races, forms of consciousness that see this physical universe and see the potential that it has for experience. So they may come from their home, let's say, their native environment may be very, very different from what we experience here in this universe, and especially on this planet. Because with all the galaxies, I would not assume that anything that we observe here on this planet or in our neighboring corner of the galaxy holds anywhere else. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Who knows what's out there? I have a strong suspicion that there's really weird and crazy stuff going on. But this is an interesting and rather unique opportunity. And so other types of consciousness see the possibilities of this planet, and they'll come here for that experience. And that may be you. At some level, that may be you. And in a sense, it's all of us, because all of us ultimately come from somewhere else, from the source. And all of us see the potential, as we split off from the source into whatever the tiniest unit, the tiniest monad of consciousness is, and we want to grow. And so, oh, here's a physical universe, here's a planet, this might be good. All right, let's come check it out. So much time goes by that you forget that and you don't know. And now you think of yourself as human. And that happens, and you are human, but you're also more, and you can become more. So that's what this planet is for. But presumably there's other types of beings that are learning in different ways, in different types of realities, that may be a different kind of physicality, maybe very different. And so they may be learning very different experiences. And that's also perfectly valid because it's an infinite creation. The possibilities are infinite. The creator doesn't just want to experience life as a physical being on a difficult planet. That's interesting, but there's other types of experience to be had as well. So I think if you think of the infinite creator and of you as a co-creator, because you split off and so you have the nature of the creator inherently, because you are a piece of it, that means that you also are a co-creator. As you choose somewhere to go to start learning and you start to experience certain things and you increase your state of consciousness, you increase the amount of free will that you have. In other words, the possibilities of what you can do next and what you can think next. You increase the possibilities of creation that you inherently have. But you need to learn to use that responsibly. And so that's part of what this training ground is, this planet. It's learning to use your creative powers responsibly so that you can then enter different dimensions, different realms, different possibilities. And then we're all going to do that together as a race. And then we can go on to do different things. But first we have to pass through this set of experiences, this training ground. And so that's, the friction that this planet provides is, very, very useful in that sense. It helps you. You can see in your own life that you can be hurtful, and that has a real effect. Well, that's you're creating that environment. You created that, and it affected another consciousness, and you hurt them. Okay, so maybe you got to stop doing that. You got to learn how to control yourself. You got to learn to not do that. That's part of this responsibility, because imagine if you were a higher level being, much more powerful, you could hurt many more people, or you can do all sorts of things that would be bad. And you don't want to do that. So, okay, we'll learn here first where the amount of damage we can do is rather limited. And as we grow and move up the chain of command, move up the hierarchy, then we can take on more responsibility. But as you move up this hierarchy of consciousness, and as you expand the amount of free will that you have, because remember, free will is a continuum. It's not something you either have or you don't have. It's just your free will expands as you can reach higher states of consciousness. You can start to enter more expansive states of consciousness where you have a clear view of the true nature of reality. You see other possibilities out there, and then you start to be able to presumably reach those. So that is, from my perspective, roughly speaking, what this physical world is, and at least the types of experience that we're having. It appears to be the case that there's many other possibilities, and there's some races that develop very harmoniously. Some races might be all negative, entirely negative. I have no idea what that would even look like, because I thought that we're pretty negative, but we're actually mixed, on this planet. You can see that there's people who are very positively oriented, people who are very, very negatively oriented, and so there's a mix. So we've got like a bit of a struggle of good and evil happening. But apparently there's possibilities for entirely good development, entirely evil development, and then something in between. And we're that in between. So why would that be the case? Well, if you're an infinite consciousness, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? It would be interesting to see, okay, what is it like to split myself into an enormous amount of beings on a planet that's positive and that's going to develop entirely positive? Well, I'm sure that's an interesting experience. I don't know what that's like, but the Creator knows. And what would it be like to split yourself into an enormous number of beings and develop entirely negatively? The Creator knows that too. And the Creator knows what's it like to be in a situation with a mixed population. Well, that's us. The Creator knows that because it's experiencing that through us. What would it be like to, have an enormous period of development, go out into the galaxy, run into another galactic civilization, and have a galactic scale war? I don't know. Maybe it's interesting. I bet you the creator knows, because I bet you that's happened somewhere. So for the creator, it's infinite possibilities, and it's going through, and it's experiencing everything, simultaneously in this constant state of, of creation, moment after moment, and infinite realities, infinite universes. It's going through so many things. And then you can think, well, okay, but but why? What's the point of that? And then you get back to the original question: why is it doing that? But if you reflect on your own experiences, they're very real, aren't they? I mean, they're very, very real. This is why, sometimes I have trouble with the word illusion, even though it is correct to say that we're in an illusion right now. It's only an illusion in a sense, in the sense that this is a reality one out of many realities, but this reality is very real when you're inside of it. And that's reflected in the experiences you have. When you're happy, you're really happy. And when you're sad, you're actually very, very sad. But you can see that for those experiences to be real, you really have to go through them. There's no faking it. There is no faking emotion. Either you have the emotion or you don't. And either you experience happiness or you don't experience happiness. And then what we experience here is that contrast between happiness and sadness. We have, when you think about positive and negative, we like to think of it in moral terms, good and evil. Think of it more in terms of, the positive and negative poles of a magnet. Which is the good side and which is the evil side? There is no such concept when you think of a magnet. It's just you have two opposing poles, and that creates the ability to do work. Well, that's what we experience as well. That's what we experience as good and evil. And that creates this interesting contrast, which creates a really interesting set of experiences, which creates this very interesting life experience that's possible, this bittersweet, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. You have struggle, you have some victories, you have some failures, you have friends, and then you lose friends, and then this happens, everything happens, and things go crazy. But it's a super interesting experience. And there would be, how could you have this experience in a fake way? And if you knew it wasn't real, why would you even pay attention? You wouldn't pay attention. But while you're here, you better pay attention, because if you don't, you may actually die. Like if you don't pay attention, if you don't eat, you're going to die. So pay attention, go get food, go do this, go get shelter. That's what we've been going through. It's like, you've got to abide by the rules of this reality. There's no getting around it. But those rules create the possibility for a very unique set of experiences. And those unique experiences create a particular set of perspectives for the creator. And for the creator, there's no difference. It can't fake things either. If it wants to imagine, if you think of this as a dream of the source consciousness, there is no difference between a dream and real. It's the same thing. If it imagines happiness, it's going to experience happiness. If it imagines sadness, it's going to experience that. Well, that's what we are. We are that creative imagination of the source consciousness. And we are the source consciousness giving itself perspectives on itself. It's experiencing itself. It's learning about itself. So, the point of this isn't spiritual growth just to grow and reunite with the source consciousness, because you are the source consciousness. That's how you started. You don't need to. What need do you have to reunite with yourself when that's what you were? That's not what you're doing here. What you're doing here is you're going through and exploring all the possibilities. And you're making those possibilities real. You're taking what is potential and you're making it actual. Because the source consciousness, or the creator, it holds within itself all of the latent possibilities, and it sees that within itself. It sees all the possibilities, all of the possible experiences that may be had, and it wants to experience those. And so the way that it can make all of that potential actual is to manifest that. So it turns what is unmanifest and it makes it manifest, and that is the creation. That is all these infinite realities and infinite dimensions and infinite universes, is this process of the creator, the source consciousness, learning about itself and experiencing itself. And as part of that, a natural part of that is that when it splits itself into like a very, very small piece, into some individual monad, which might start as a very primitive consciousness and slowly, work its way up, a natural part of that journey of self-discovery and of learning is going to be the desire for spiritual growth. The spiritual growth isn't the initial point, I don't think. because it already has perfection. But it's a very interesting experience to start off small and become bigger, thinking in terms of consciousness, to start off as a very, very small unit of consciousness and go through many, many lives and many experiences on many different planets and in many different realities. Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? And to slowly wake up and to see, see what you really are, and to slowly come to the realizations like, wait a minute, holy crap, I'm much different than what I thought I was. I'm a different type of thing than I thought I was. And then you proceed and you grow, and the more you learn about that, you go, wait a minute, what's next? What's possible? What's possible? What else can I do? What else is possible? Well, that's the experience, and that's the journey that the Creator is on, and it's super interesting. And if I, for example, just look back on just this very limited experience I've had here in this life, it's been wild for me, really, really wild to be born into a society that has certain views. And then ever since I was a teenager, I just kind of thought, like, man, there's something else going on. I don't know, something doesn't add up. I don't know what this is. And then slowly, you go through life and you do this and you do that and you work and, all sorts of things happen. And, always in the back of my mind is like, there's something else going on. This is not just I randomly showed up here and everything's physical and I've got to go get a job or else I starve to death or something like that. That's the whole purpose. And then slowly, you research it, you study, and you contemplate, and you meditate, and then you start to wake up to this greater reality. It's like, oh, wait a minute, of course, I'm not this physical body. I just came into this physical body to experience this life. Oh, of course, that makes sense. And then as you start to unravel more and more, it's wild. It's a really wild experience to actually slowly wake up during an incarnation and realize, wait, what the hell? Of course, and it's like, of course, I was an idiot. I mean, this makes perfect sense. That's what I'm doing. Okay, so what's next? Now what do I do? Just that experience of being asleep and slowly waking up is super interesting. Well, what is that experience like? Well, I know it. I'm sure many of you do as well. And now the Creator knows it. That's one set of experiences for the Creator to have. So, what else is possible out there? I don't know. I mean, I've read a lot of things that a lot of other people have discovered, and I've gotten hints as to what's out there and what's possible. And it sounds really wild. It sounds really, really cool. And I can't wait to get a crack at it. And I think that that's where we're heading. As a race and as a planet. I think that there's a lot of us that have reached the stage where we've sort of maxed out to a certain degree the possibilities of this constant, process of reincarnation, because even this, the way that this planet is constituted at the moment, where you're born, you lose all your memories, you have to, you have a life, you go back to the spirit realm. Okay, you kind of gather yourself. Okay, what's next? Let me think of another, incarnation to have that will help me learn. And then you come back and your memories are wiped again. That's just one possible way of exploring the infinite possibilities, and that doesn't have to last forever. There's a point at which, okay, that's no longer that useful. You've sort of, you've kind of hit like the limits of that, because there are problems with constantly having your memory wiped. You have to start all over. And what if you don't wake up during an incarnation? What if and I'm sure that happens all the time. I'm sure it's happened to me a bazillion times. You take it too seriously. And then you think, oh no, I am here to make money. I am here to accrue power. Oh yeah, that's what I'm, it's like, wait, okay, crap. Well, and I'm sure that you die and you go back, you're like, damn it. I kind of wasted that one. So I think that we're getting ready for the next set of possibilities, which is we don't have to lose our memory every time. We can remain connected. You can remain connected to your higher self and to this broader reality, but we'll have done it having gone through all these experiences. We'll be much stronger because we went through however long it's been that we've been struggling on this planet. We went through that. We learned that. It's like we graduated from that, and now we're on to a new set of possibilities. And it's going to be really, really interesting, I think, to be a race that can look back at its own history and see the struggle that it's been through, and to see that it's reached new states of being and new states of possibilities. I think I can just only imagine that's going to be a really interesting thing. What's that like? Well, we're about to find out. And so is the Creator. The Creator's about to find out, and he's going to find out, or it's going to find out through us. That's part of what we're doing. We're exploring perspectives and exploring consciousness. So I think that for me, at least, the best way to think about what you're doing here is not spiritual growth or like solving a puzzle essentially just to see if you can solve the puzzle. And if you solve it, congratulations, you get a good grade and you get a pat on the head. And if you don't, you're an idiot and you got to go back and you're punished. That's not what we're doing. We are facets of the Creator. We are co-creators. We have the creative potential of the Creator. We have the free will of the Creator because we are the Creator. And what we're doing is we're the threads of consciousness that are exploring all the possibilities of existence. And so we're here exploring physical existence at the moment. And what we're doing is gathering all this experience to take it back to ourselves, to take it back to the Creator as an offering of experience. That's the purpose of the journey out and back. It's not to go out just to reunite. It's to go out, gather experience, say, hey, in this infinite, because there's different, infinity, you want to go crazy, start thinking about infinity. In this infinite range of possibilities, I went out and I gathered this set of experiences. And you bring it back as an offering to the Creator. Here's what I found. Here's what I experienced. I lived 15 trillion lives in 15 trillion realities. And I grew from nothing into a consciousness that could encompass a whole galaxy. I don't know. Who knows what the hell's going to happen? You may as well think big. Why not? And you're going to bring that back to the Creator, which is you. So you go, oh yeah, that was actually pretty cool. That was actually pretty interesting. I remember those 1,000 lifetimes when I didn't know what was going on. That was actually really interesting when I look back. I'm glad I did that because then that helped me get to this, to get to this, to get to this, and then I did this, and then I learned this. I'm like, oh, that was pretty cool. So essentially, I think that's what's going on. And if you think, well, that seems kind of arbitrary or something, I think that's where you just kind of can look around at how, even though sometimes it's difficult, sometimes what you experience, it's really, really beautiful. It's just really beautiful to have this particular set of experiences, to look out, look into nature, look into a society. You walk out in the city and you see all the people. It's just super interesting. It's so particular. It's just like a particular set of things that have to come together and happen to give you that perspective of, oh, here I am walking down the sidewalk and there's 1,000 other people walking around me. And look, this guy's eating a hot dog and I'm going to go here and I'm going to get this and look, and then I'm going to go. Okay, that's just really interesting, and it's beautiful in its own way. So to a certain degree, there really is nothing that you need to do or accomplish. You don't have to go out and become some enlightened monk or something and achieve the power of levitation and your brain is glowing and you're shooting blue light out of your hands. Like, you don't have to do any of that. It doesn't matter. You just sit and experience. You're just providing yourself a perspective on infinite possibilities. At some point, as you do that, you're just going to, I think, naturally get curious and say, I wonder what else is happening. Okay, I think I've had enough pizza in one lifetime. What else is out there? I've been walking around the sidewalk in the city. Okay, what else is out there? And that's the stage we're getting at. That we're getting to now as a whole race. Okay, it's like we've been on this planet a while. I think we understand conflict and war and and greed and ego and power and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I get it. All right, what's next? Let's move on, shall we? And who knows what's next? But I think it's gonna be pretty cool. Certainly, I think to me the why question, it's the biggest question, and it's one that I think about a lot. And I answer it for myself in different ways, and sometimes I'm more convinced than others. Than other times. Like sometimes I can convince myself it's like, okay, no, this is why. Sometimes, you're in the middle of experience and it's bad. And you tell yourself, no, this is for my growth. It's like, yeah, okay, that's easy, It's easy to say, but it doesn't feel like growth right now. But, ultimately it is. And ultimately it's all interesting. And I've got a feeling that, I don't know, I think that what we're going through as the human race here, this has got to be one of the toughest challenges, right? I don't know. I mean, I think that once we make it through this, I think we're going to have some respect from everyone else that's out there because, man, it's, to come and incarnate as a limited physical being, lose all your memories, live on a planet that's rough, where it's dangerous. Yes, you can die. Are you so sure that you're going to live forever? Boy, death sure feels real. It's like, you know what? I better actually, I'm not so convinced. I'm going to actually, I'm going to fight back just in case. I need to protect myself because you don't, how many lifetimes have you had where you weren't so sure that you're actually going to live forever? I think that's a really interesting experience, and I think it's going to give us a really interesting strength and perspective as a race once we get through this. And I think it's going to, open up this future, I don't know, possible experiences for us to have, and that's just going to be a really, really interesting journey for the creator. And I think that we individually and collectively are going to have a pretty incredible offering of experience to present to the creator at some point. And that's what we're working towards. So hope this helps, guys. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm an idiot. It's possible. Just let me know. And always happy to talk. Thanks, guys.